Hi there, and thank you for joining us on the Overcomers Overcoming podcast. We feature those who are in the process of overcoming or have overcome any type of life encounter, life obstacle that at the time seemed to be almost insurmountable. With this podcast, we have three objectives in mind. Our first objective is we want you to know with a confident resolve you are not alone. We want to work with you. We want you to know there are others who are working with you, who want to help you through whatever you are encountering, and together we will get through whatever you're experiencing.
Our second objective is there are multiple options for any life encounter you are facing. We want to help you develop a resolve that there are various options and solutions to any life dilemma.
Our third objective is to help you with critical thinking skills. If you're encountering something that was possibly a decision you made sometime in the past, and if you had the opportunity for a life redo, you would make a different decision. We want to help you with those critical thinking skills that can help you make an informed decision and not encounter what you're going through at the moment. We are the Cooper Culture, a veteran-owned business. We work with business personnel and families to develop and sustain connected relationship cultures within their families and organizations. That type organization is one where people feel wanted, appreciated, and genuinely a part of that organization. I'm with my wife and business partner, Marty, who has helped me facilitate this podcast. Today we feature Nancy Nungari, who talks about her life that started in Kenya, then went to Germany, then Canada, then back to Germany, and many of the aspects of her early life where she felt a failure because she was born out of wedlock, and just various things that she was trying to process in her life. She blamed herself for so much, but it was when she learned through her mother that the Lord is the one we rely on to bring us through various life travails, that over a period of time, and she acknowledges she is still recovering, but it was through that process, and a credit to her mother, that she was able to rely more on the Lord the older she got. Marty, what are some takeaways our listeners can gain from Nancy?
I learned from Nancy, children take on the responsibility, and it's their fault if, like Nancy, born out of wedlock, her parents wouldn't have fought, her father wouldn't have been an alcoholic if she were not born. So she took that on. And many children take on when parents get a divorce, oh, it's my fault. If I were a good child, if you're taken on and thinking it's your fault for whatever has happened in your life, listen to Nancy today and you realize that it isn't your fault.
It's a great life lesson. Let's listen and learn together. Hi, Nancy. It's good to have you with us. I understand you have gone through various life travails. You have moved from different locations, Germany to Canada, back to where you are. You've had kind of somewhat of a journey around the world. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron and Marty. Glad to be here.
Nancy, can you give our listeners a brief summary of some of the things you have been through, endured, mainly how you've overcome those kind of things?
Right. How I've overcome those kind of things. The story of the overcomer. Okay, just a brief background. I'm born in Kenya, East Africa. When I was born, my parents were not married, so I was born out of wedlock. I didn't know that until I was about 5 years old. So my father was in Russia when I was born. He came back, maybe I was about 3 years old. And I have two brothers. And when I was growing up, there was a lot of turmoil at home. And because in Africa or in Kenya, when two people have a child out of wedlock, they are not obliged, but they're almost forced to get married because, like, okay, she has your baby, you need to marry her. So I often felt responsible when I found out that they were not married when I was conceived and I was conceived out of wedlock, I often felt responsible for the turmoil in our home. There was a lot of violence. My father drank a lot. I just felt very responsible for their marriage. First of all, I thought it was my fault. And so I did all kinds of things as a young girl to try and keep the peace, like being very good in school. And because I noticed having good grades would take the attention. My father would, take the attention on that, and he would be very interested in my academic grades. And so when he came home drunk and there was potential for violence, my mother would say, go and tell him about your school. And then I would avert that kind of situation. So I grew up with a very performance mindset, like an overachiever, actually, that's what I would say. My mother became a Christian, I think was about 11 years old. She came home one day. She used to work for a missionary organization called Life Ministry. And she came home one day and sat me and my brother by the bed and said, I've given my life to Christ. And I didn't understand what that meant, but things shifted at home, definitely. It's like Jesus moved in, but the enemy moved in as well. So there was very much extreme. The aggression got more, and my mother's peace was also very tangible. She found solace and strength, obviously, in her faith. And then she introduced us to going to church, so she introduced praying and reading the Bible. And there was I still remember there was like a picture on the wall that said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But my father was completely, he was like almost not offended, but I guess it was the aspect of somebody else's authority has moved in. It looks like Jesus' authority or God's authority is higher than mine. So he became very, very aggressive and very violent. Well, long story short, by the time I was about 13, I had experienced what they call ACEs, advanced childhood experiences, all of them. So every kind of abuse, because obviously when there's war going on in the house, the children kind of fall by the wayside. And so the protection that should have been there was not there. And I didn't tell my parents what was going on. I didn't tell them about the abuse in school from a school teacher. I thought, it's my fault, and there was already enough going on. I dare not bring that up. I probably thought I would be blamed and maybe get in trouble for it anyway. And then I went on to high school. And by the time I was in high school, I just decided there cannot be any God. I was introduced to smoking and partying. And I decided there cannot be any God, because if there's one, why doesn't he, this God of my mother, why doesn't he intervene? Because things really were bad at home. So when I went to boarding school, it was a nice escape away from home. I was glad to be like off the war zone for a while. And then boarding school, of course, got introduced to drinking, and somebody smuggled cigarettes. And then that's how I found a way to numb my pain. So now, instead of escaping to my books, because that used to be my escape place when I was a young girl, I was now introduced something else to escape to. Besides the attention of boys, there was now something that could numb the pain and the emotional turmoil that I had. One thing led to another. By the time I finished high school, I wasn't going back home. I was in a boarding school. So when boarding school ended, I was not going back home. I'd been in trouble in high school. I'd been expelled from my school, and my dad and my mom, they had shipped me off to an uncle. So I was like living in exile at my uncle's while I was doing my exams, because away from the home tension. And then after the exams, I didn't go back home, and I didn't go back to my uncle. So I started hanging out with my friends, and I was introduced to partying, and one thing led to another. And I started doing drugs and a lot of drinking. I was basically numbing all the emotional pain and from the abuse. I was now a teenager, all the identity crisis that comes with that. Now my new identity was like this party girl, and I was very aggressive. I was very, very angry. And I remember how much anger I had towards Christians, because in boarding school we had CRE, Christian Religious Education, like like the way they have debate club or history club, they had the Christian, and they would come and of course tell us about, evangelize, basically tell us about, and I was very, very aggressive towards them, almost to the point of being violent. And I would mock them, actually. I would mock the Christians and say, oh, your imaginary friend, haha. So I was just a bad girl, basically acting up out of my pain. And after high school, like I said, running with different kinds of people, I made a lot of bad choices, hang out with different friends. I wouldn't say it was their influence because I think I was more the influence, really, although my mom thought they're the ones who are spoiling my girl. She didn't know I was actually like the ringleader, I was the one who initiated that stuff. Nothing that I'm proud of today. But just to say, because sometimes people say, oh, peer pressure, and it's almost like those other people made me do it. No, nobody made me do it. I was actually inspiring others to do it, inspiring others to just be rebellious. And then, with a friend, we went down partying, and then I met a man who was many years older than me, and we moved in together. So I never went back home after I finished my high school. I literally like ran away from home. So we moved in together, and I continued with numbing myself, substance abuse, alcohol, different kinds of drugs. When his job contract in Germany, he was based in Germany, he was from Germany. When it ended, we moved together to Germany, and that's how I first landed in Germany. And then we got married. So that's how I ended up to be where I am here now. How I moved on to other countries is part of the journey to faith, if I can say, or the redemption story.
Nancy, let me ask you how I'm processing what you're saying. You had childhood anxieties and you felt you were the blame for a lot of your problems between your parents. You blamed yourself for those things, and not necessarily the case, but that's what it was. And then it appears you were seeking peace. You just wanted something good. And through the influence of others, the peace that you thought you wanted may come from drugs, alcohol, and so forth. But in fact, your life was just going further downhill. Is there anything I'm not processing correctly?
You say that absolutely, absolutely correct. Anxiety is an understatement. I actually had traumas, there were childhood traumas from just waking up and not knowing whether your mom is going to be alive that evening or not. And just a lot of things, the things that happen when there's domestic violence and alcohol and things that happen in that. And like I mentioned, the swimming teacher. So it was not just anxieties, it was every level of trauma, you can say. I felt responsible as as a child. I felt responsible for the turmoil in the home because I always thought, well, if I wasn't born, these two would not be together. So it's actually my fault. So it's also my responsibility to make everybody peaceful. It's my responsibility to try and calm the storms because it's your fault. If you weren't born, they would never have been together. They did not choose to be together except because of you. So, and of course, that's a lie. I know that now. But as a child, you think children are very, I don't want to say selfish, but we kind of think that we have more control over things than we do. Children think that they have more control over things that they do. That false sense of responsibility was very heavy on I was a very sensitive child. I am still a sensitive woman, but as a little girl, I was very sensitive. So I didn't know where to take all that sense of what can I do to change this and what I saw. I didn't know. And I was a firstborn, so I was also responsible like to comfort my brothers when, there's violence going on in the other room and my brothers are crying. I was the one to kind of shield them and comfort them. And so it left me very, I would say, overwhelmed by all that. I didn't know where to take all those emotions. And looking for peace is also an understatement. I just wanted not only peace, but a sense of protection, a sense of it's going to be okay. Also, what do I do with all that pain? There was a lot of unprocessed trauma. And now I know what all that kind of emotional pain, what it can do. But that led me to the addiction because hindsight now, I believe that addiction is really, it's an escape. People who are addicted, there's something going on behind there. They're not just getting addicted for the fun of it. They might start off as fun, maybe, and then they kind of spiral. But for many who kind of slid into that like a slippery slope, you said downward spiral. Indeed, it was a downward spiral. For many people, there is something that is unprocessed. They might not even really know what it is. And then to numb that pain, like to literally, like it got to a point where I didn't want to just numb it. I wanted to anesthetize it, like just not feel at all. So you start with like a cigarette as a 14-year-old, and then you have some grass as a 15-year-old, and then you had alcohol and you feel a little bit fuzzy. And it gets to a point where you need more because the pain is still there and it actually adds up because dysfunctional behaviors, wrong choices I made meant that more pain came, like choosing the wrong relationship, choosing men who are also dysfunctional, who were violent. So the pain just adds up, and you're not looking for peace, you're looking for a way to ease that. And there was none. At
Yeah,
least that's what I thought at that point.
and I appreciate what you're saying. Are you at a point in your life now where you have the peace you sought, you wish you had earlier in life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's been a journey. I wouldn't say that I have arrived because, life, nobody in life is exempt from trials and tribulations and painful situations. We're not exempt from that. Finding faith or finding redemption doesn't exempt me from pain, but there's one huge difference. If I would say I found that peace, I know that I'm not alone. And even more importantly, I've learned that I can take that pain and there's somewhere I can bring it to. And it's not just theory, it's from experience where I know if I didn't have Jesus, if I couldn't bring my pain to him, I would be reaching out for the bottle or even more. Or maybe I wouldn't, actually, probably wouldn't be alive because of the different things that have happened. There was a point where the pain was so bad, I thought it's not worth it. I just don't want to continue living anymore. That's where the atheist, because I had become an atheist along the line, that's where the people say they are atheists, and I respect that because I had that stance and I had reasons for that. I couldn't believe in a God who allowed so much pain and so much hurt. I didn't know, of course, that we live in a fallen world and, we are also responsible human beings. I just blamed God and I decided it's his fault. So I went looking for other ways to ease my pain or to find the peace. I dabbled in occultism, New Age, into Far East religions. I went down a lot of paths looking to find myself, the universe and all that. So I have the peace, yes.
Let me ask you the journey to start finding the peace, the
Yes.
turnaround, if you will. It sounds as if you use the term journey. It may have been a 10-year or so journey, but can you, as you think back on this, was it a person? Who was it? What was it that started you to thinking more positively? I'm trying to think of the right words, but it's what I'm perceiving. At a period of time, you started thinking better about yourself, your life. Maybe you stopped blaming yourself.
Hmm. Who was it? I would say without me knowing who it was, my mother was praying for me all those years. She not only was praying for me, but she would come looking for me. Even when I moved in with the boyfriend who later became my husband, she would come looking for me anywhere because I would go and visit my brothers in school. I missed them and I was estranged from my family and I missed it. So they would tell her, oh, Nancy was there. And she would somehow find where I was and she would come looking for me. And I didn't want anything to do with her because I didn't want anything with her God. And I was just done. I was not coming back to the war zone. So on one side, I could say, I thank God for my mother's prayers because she never said like, I'm done with you and how could you? She later on when we reconciled, she said she would always pray for me day and night and just ask God to take care of me. And he was really doing that because there were multiple times where I could have died actually. Besides that, okay, without me knowing. From my side, from the actions that I took, from my journey, the steps of the journey I took, when we moved here to Germany, it was very different than what I expected. It was very lonely. In Africa, we had friends and we went out and, we partied. And then suddenly we're in Europe and there's no going out because you can't drink and drive. We don't know anybody. We lived like anonymously. You could go like a week or two and you don't see your neighbor. You just go about your day. And it was very, very different. I didn't speak the language, so it was very, very difficult. when I came here. And then he was transferred to the Arabian countries, like on a short contract, and again, a short contract. He would often get sent to different countries for work. And so I was suddenly alone in a foreign country. I didn't speak the language, I didn't know anybody, and I was completely overwhelmed. I was going to school, and then I started, I continued with my substance abuse, and then I started running around with different people again. I made choices that I shouldn't have made. I ran around with different people who are beyond partying, like really very destructive lifestyles. One thing led to another. There was murder involved or somebody manslaughter, and I was a witness to the court case. I was called as a witness. And I knew that my friend was innocent because I knew I had been there. I knew what had happened. But I was a witness too for the persecution, which was also very difficult. I would say that situation made my heart kind of start warming up because we started praying. We knew if she's not declared, not guilty, she could go for life or even more. And so as the court case dragged on and we were praying, and I called home and I asked my mom and my brothers, can you pray? And later they told me that they were praying not only for my friend, but they were praying for me and for all of us to find God beyond this horrible situation that had happened. The day my friend was declared not guilty was something, the hard shell broke, because this was clearly his intervention. Like, she could go home, not even like us on a small charge, somebody's life was gone, but she was not guilty. They found her not guilty. And because I knew what had happened and I knew that she was not guilty, it was still like a miracle, because it could have gone both ways. So I think that case that situation kind of cracked a little, the hardness that I had in my heart softened. And when I came back home from the court case, I found something in my briefkasten is German, in my post box, like Jesus something. There was an invitation, an evangelism invitation to go for like a tent meeting, like walking distance from home. Bear in mind, my husband at that time is still abroad. I'm trying to maneuver my way around here, running around with different people and people who are making bad choices and just getting in trouble, basically. When I saw that, it was like post from God. I normally say I literally came home and there was post from God, because I'd never seen something like that before. Anyway, I went to this meeting and I sat at the back, very like, didn't really understand what they were saying. But when the preacher, when the pastor made an altar call, even if I didn't understand everything, I understood that, and I went down and they prayed for me. One of the ladies spoke English and she said, oh, you're a new, how did she say? The angels in heaven are celebrating. And I find it kind of weird. I'm like, whatever. And you need a Bible. And I said, I don't have a Bible. And the next day she called me and she had an English Bible for me. And she said, you need to go to find a church, and now you have a new lifestyle. Something changed when I went down that altar. Now, of course, I know, but when I came back home, I was a different person. It was just a few days after the court case, so I'm still very raw from all that trauma of the case, and I'm still very shaken about everything. And then now this evangelism. So I would say that God works all things for good. That bad situation kind of led to the praying and the following of the hard ground, you can say. And when my friends came to visit me, because it was just a few days after the court case, they found me with a big red Bible. I had no drugs, I had nothing. And they're like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, oh, I went to this place yesterday, because they were doing like 3 days of evangelism. I said, let's go. I went to this place. You need to come with me. And they went with me and we sat at the back and they were giggling and making fun. And they're like, and I'm just like, this is so good, And when we went home, they said, call us when you're done with that. We're not into all that. Just give us a call when you're ready to just get back to normal. So to answer your question, my mother's prayers, but his love of seeking out the prodigal to the point of post in my post box. In my post box.
And I don't want to answer for you, Nancy, but here's how I'm processing what you're saying. The court case the not guilty verdict had an impact on you. But then also, when God says, Nancy, I don't hold you guilty, or I don't hold you responsible for what happened in your early life, you are free. And your mom's praying for you. As you're explaining all of this, I'm wondering if maybe you process things something like that. And I'm not trying to answer for you.
Mm. That's a good question because it took me years, and I can say it's still like an ongoing process to renew my mind to those lies of feeling like you were an accident, you were not planned for, which can, basically bring like a root of rejection, like feeling like I don't belong and I wasn't supposed to be here. But to answer your question, I didn't really feel like responsible for them. A little bit still, because when they would fight, my mother would always try to, how do I say this without dishonoring them, to go and talk to him, go and talk to your dad, because he had a spot for me, I guess, and it was just her way of turning away the aggression and go and talk to him. So I still kind of felt responsible. I would say I was parentified. So that parental inversion, where as a child you're taking on more emotional responsibility or even burdens than you're supposed to. And even still, when I grew up, even later, that dynamic was still there. So I was always I tried to avoid it, and I guess just getting away as far as possible. I mean, how far can you get Germany from Kenya? I still felt responsible. And even now, later, when I started processing like CPTSD or things that came up much later, where I thought, there's some things that I don't see quite right. And where did that come from? It's still like sometimes I have to remind myself now as an adult not to overfunction and kind of be codependent and take on a fixer role. I mean, I became a coach and I was like a counselor. It just translates that weight of taking care of everybody else and feeling responsible. So there's a subconscious part of it where even today I still have to remind myself like it's okay. You can have empathy for people, like I could have empathy for my parents, to distance myself and say, but it's not my responsibility to fix that. Or somebody is hurting and I can see that and I can show them compassion, but I don't have to try and fix them or rescue them or make them feel better so that I feel better. So being able to sit with the discomfort of seeing other people uncomfortable. So back to my parents, they've both passed on now, but I still carry that sense of responsibility to bring peace or to make everybody like just be okay. And I was good at that because it was a survival mechanism, a trauma response like phoning or, trying to fix. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's fine. There may be some of our listeners who have experienced some childhood things as you did. Just curious on behalf of our listeners, if they have experienced anything like that, they're blaming themselves for any of their maybe past problem, anything like that. How would a person get through that? It's a long journey from what I'm learning for what you're saying, and maybe you're still on that recovery journey.
Absolutely. It is. Absolutely. It is a long journey. And like I said, I haven't arrived, but I'm way, way, way definitely. The distance between where I've left and where I'm going is amazing. I've definitely left. An ongoing journey as far as renewing my mind and even like bringing those narratives, those stories that I believed or that I formed because of what happened to me, and seeing how the past, if it's not reconciled, if we don't reconcile it to, I would say, to the cross, it still affects our present. People say time heals all wounds. It doesn't. It's like going around with a bullet lodged somewhere in your body, and just because there's a scar, that bullet could still be doing damage in there. So there'll need to be a point where you're going to have to answer your question. If somebody has had childhood trauma, or not even childhood trauma, even adulthood trauma, and the world is a fallen world, so trauma is like in the eyes of the beholder. I don't get to decide what was traumatizing for one person, because it depends on the individual and their capacity to process the painful thing that has happened. But what I would advise is, especially if somebody finds themselves trying to numb themselves, like it's almost like running away from yourself, which is impossible. And it doesn't have to be drugs and alcohol like I did, or destructive relationships. It can be work. Work is a drug that we don't talk about. I went into that too, just being a workaholic and always feeling like you need to do more because, keep yourself busy, because what if I stop and all these things come up? Ooh, I'll be overwhelmed. I would advise someone, especially if there's someone who tends to, they just know, and we know it. We know it, know that this is not healthy, what I'm doing. And when we're young, it can be easy to get up, to keep doing it because, we're young and energetic. But 30s, 40s, it kind of starts to creep up. What I would advise is start processing it, get some help, but start with small things. Don't go for the big thing. Start with the little T. Find a safe space, or whether it be a church, a counselor, a therapist, to process it. And often processing it, it's really giving it a voice and letting yourself be able to share your story in a safe space where you can process the things that you are not able to process back then. Because trauma shuts us up. It shatters as well, shatters our personality, and it steals our voices, basically. And that's why we have these things inside us that we can't talk about. And then it's painful. And so we try and like stuff it down with a bottle, with a relationship, with addiction, with pornography, with alcohol, whatever, just stuff it down. Let's just keep pushing it down. But it's like a Coca-Cola bottle, bit of shaking and woof, it's just going to be messy, and it has to explode. So before it gets to a place where it explodes, I would advise them to maybe even just start reading about it. Just take small steps towards it. You don't want to overwhelm yourself and re-traumatize yourself, but start even considering. It can be a simple prayer like, God, I have some painful memories that I've never gone. I have some doors with like things I've shut in there. Help me. As simple as that. And He's there. And it's a journey, and you'd be amazed at how He initiates the journey, starts bringing people your way. It's not like a big thing, I'm going to chew this. There's a saying, we say, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it piece by piece. So I would advise them, don't try and take on too much. The biggest thing, just start with small things and process that. Find a safe space. Sometimes just talking about it, that helps.
No, that's good. In the context of reconciling, did you have the opportunity to maybe seek forgiveness of, or at least have a very candid conversation with your dad before he passed away?
Yes, with both of them, because I caused them a lot of pain, obviously. Yes, I had the opportunity. And the good news is that he also, in the end, gave his life to Jesus. So by the time he was transitioning, we knew like where his destination is, and he was a completely different person. We did have the opportunity, I had the opportunity to apologize. I had the opportunity to ask him for forgiveness. And also, what was very important was I was holding a lot of grudges against him. I had even just judgments against him that he didn't even know or didn't need to know. And it was also important to reconcile that and in honor say, okay, God, this was the father you gave me, and he was not perfect, but it's not my place to judge him and think he should have done better, because I don't know if he could have done better. So that was important, to seek his forgiveness, but also to forgive myself also for the wrong choices and the judgments that I made. And I kind of felt like I had to forgive God. It's a strange thing to say, but I held a grudge against God too. So I know you can't forgive God, but we can be honest with him and say, I've been angry with you, God. I have been angry. I've been mad at you. I've been holding a grudge against you. I mean, he already knows that, but having that conversation and again, just being able to speak that out was very healing.
I can appreciate what you just said. As we bring this in for a land, I want to thank you on behalf of our listeners. you did reconcile, and I can imagine you have released a lot of your stress through that process of reconciliation. You did mention small steps. I'm going to guess the reconciliation, talking with your mom and dad, may in some cases or instances seem small, but in hindsight, I'm guessing that was a pretty big thing. But I want to encourage our listeners to, as you said, find space and reconcile those that you might need to forgive and just seek that release of whatever it is you may be holding, because I'm sensing you used to have a lot of stress in your life. You do not have that stress now. But Nancy, thank you so much on behalf of our listeners for being very open, very vulnerable to express what you've been through. But the good part is you are recovering, and we look forward to continuing your journey with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ron, for having me. I appreciate it. Yes, thank you.
We appreciate having the opportunity to share our and our guests' life experiences with you.
The Cooper culture advances organizations to achieve and sustain high retention rates, connected communication, and trust through personality insights and principled leadership. You can contact us at our website, thecooperculture.com, and you can contact us directly at ron@thecooperculture.com or Marty, MARTY, at thecooperculture.com. We work with you to help assess aspects of your culture to advance the environment and people to their best performance. We do that through our staff of certified personal performance coaches, leadership trainers, keynote speakers, and DISC personality behavior experts. You can book a speaking engagement directly through our website by contacting us at ron@thecooperculture.com. We look forward to sharing our life experiences with you, some of which are profound, some of which are pretty funny. Some of those life experiences are ones we'll never do that again because we've been through stuff. We truly look forward to working with you, speaking with you, helping advance you in any way that we can.